Hi everyone, I'm back. My name is Alice, and today we're going to be talking about a really important concept in genetics, and that is the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium principle. Okay, so I said it had to do with genetics, and the reason for that is because it actually talks about evolution. So before we get into what exactly the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is, I want to make sure that you know what evolution is. Okay, so evolution is actually any change in frequencies of alleles in the gene pool. So just to remind you, a gene pool is a combination of all the alleles in a population. So if you have 100 individuals in a population, then typically you're going to have 200 alleles because each individual or each organism has two alleles. Okay, so the gene pool is all the alleles in a population. And evolution is any change in allele frequencies. So if you have a big A, little a proportion of 50-50 in one generation, and in the second generation, that allele frequency changes to 60-40, that is an example of evolution. So now to talk specifically about the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium principle. This is it. So absent disturbance factors, genetic variation will remain constant from one generation to the next. So basically, if we have certain things that happen in a population, or certain things that don't happen in a population rather, there will be no evolution. So no change in allele frequencies. So what are these disturbance factors exactly? We also call them conditions of Hardy-Weinberg. Okay, so sometimes you'll see this listed in a different way. Sometimes you'll see them say that there are 7 conditions or 5 conditions, or you'll see a lot of them combined sometimes. It's a little bit confusing, but these are the main ideas, right? The main ideas are always the same. And these are those ideas. Okay, so first off, mutations do not occur. So there are no mutations that just randomly come up in the gene pool. Second is that natural selection does not occur. So normally you would have the fact that, bigger animals, stronger animals, they tend to survive and reproduce more. But in the condition of Hardy-Weinberg, if we were to have this equilibrium, that would not occur. And the next one is that the population is infinitely large. Okay, so the reason we want this is to control for something called genetic drift. So that's just randomness that comes up from one population to another. So if you flip a coin, you would expect that 50% of the time you are going to get heads up, and 50% of the time you're going to get tails up. If you only flip the coin 10 times, you might get 6 heads or 7 heads or 4 heads or 3 heads instead of 5, which is what you would normally expect. So this isn't because your coin is rigged. It just means that, out of randomness, because you only tested 10 times, that you have a very high likelihood of drifting, right? So if you have a population that's infinitely large, then your chances of genetic drift decrease significantly. All right, and the next tenet is that all members of the population reproduce randomly and equally. So this is very similar to the natural selection principle. Right? So there's no bias in the kind of genes that are being passed down to the next generation. There is no migration in or out of the population. So this prevents gene flow, right? Gene flow is the flow of genes from one population into another, and you want to prevent this from happening, or else you may have evolution. All right. So this is obviously impossible, okay? In real world scenarios, we don't have infinitely large populations. People move from one place to another all the time. Animals do the same. Plants have winds that carry their seeds, or animals that carry their seeds, things like that. Mutations occur all the time randomly. Okay, so that means that evolution, or a change in the alleles of the population, is inevitable in real populations. So basically, Hardy-Weinberg tells us the conditions that we need for a very perfect allele frequency, right? But if we don't have those conditions, no real population has those conditions, we get evolution of one kind or another. So, from this, what exactly do you need to know about the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? So there are a couple of equations that will help you answer questions and basically understand this principle. So the first one is that P and Q, P plus Q equals 1. So P stands for big A allele, so the dominant allele, and Q stands for little a, which is also known as the recessive allele. So that makes sense, right? So the gene that you're looking at either has to be dominant or recessive. And the other thing is that p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1. So if you square p plus q equals 1, you will get that second equation. But if you only look at the second equation, it actually makes a lot of sense, right? So p squared would be individuals who are homozygous dominant, right? So they have big A, big A. And then 2pq would be all the people who are heterozygous for that particular trait. And then q squared is going to be the little a, in other words, the homozygous recessive. And 1 is 100%, right? The total number of organisms in that population. So going back to the definition of P and Q, you can see that P equals big A plus 1/2 of big A, little a. So this tells you the frequency of the P allele in the gene pool, right? So big A is the number of people who are homozygous dominant, and then 1/2 of big A, little a is going to be the number of people who have the dominant allele but are carriers and therefore they're heterozygous. And then the opposite is true for the Q allele there. So the number of Q alleles that you have is going to be the number of little a's, and then half of the number of big A, little a heterozygotes. All right, and then the last part of the concept is that populations are inherently stable, okay, in their allele frequency. So sometimes this is hard to understand because you think, well, the dominant trait is just going to dominate, and eventually all of the alleles will be dominant because everything will figure itself out, and then all of the heterozygotes will show the dominant trait. But actually, the allele frequencies do not change. Right, so I want to show you this Punnett square here, where if you have the two heterozygotes mating, you have equal, 25% chance for each of these, right? So each parent has 50% chance of passing on their little or their recessive allele to the next generation. And so actually, your Under normal circumstances, population alleles are inherently stable, so you won't see a lot of variation. So that's it. That's the end of this video. I really hope this helped you understand the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium principle and that you can sort of understand how to use this to solve different problems that you have. So if this helped you out, I hope the videos over there can help you even further. So be sure to click on those and click down below if you want to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.